The title of my talk is The Physical Artist in the Incorporeal World. And as you said, for 15 years I've been studying technology. For the New York Times, for the Wall Street Journal. Living near Silicon Valley, I am heavily influenced by what's going on down there. And it is my thinking that the technology is taking us not just into deep social changes, but in a fundamental change in the civilization. Whether for good or evil, it really isn't my part to say, but it is what's happening. For those of you who haven't checked your phones in the first 2 minutes of my talk, thank you very much. For those of you who feel some need to in the back of your heads, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that is that these powerful little devices, which we call phones, are actually powerful personal computers that we assume connect almost as a natural right to an infinite amount of computation, an infinite amount of storage, and a kind of ability to communicate with any of 4 to 6 billion people in the world. And there's never been anything like this, obviously. And they watch us as much as we use them to watch the rest of the world. And that is noted for both positive and nefarious reasons, over which we have varying degrees of control. Now, that, I think, plays an important role in the art before us today, that Joanna, either consciously or intuitively, is coming after, this kind of change in how people feel about the world and themselves, this deeper sense of connection and also this troubling sense of being overwhelmed by all that is going on around us. Now, how do I know Joanna? We were parents at the same school 15 years ago, I suppose. We met at a fundraiser where we were incapable of speaking with most of the rest of the people, and so naturally gravitated to each other. Got to know each other better. I liked her art very much from the beginning. And she is also, as you may know, a very skilled contractor, handyman, what have you, electrician. And I got to tell you, she's done work on my house. And if you need somebody to match stains, hire a painter, because she can match paint and stain better than anybody I know. And we have also been sharing notes informally on some of the physical and emotional realities of being parents and being in the world at this time. So, with all that in mind, let's talk about art, and let's talk about where the artist stands today. I think art has actually been grappling with issues raised by technology for a very long time, I would argue. Well, at least for over 150 years. You could go back to the Age of Discovery or the 17th century and the Scientific Revolution and say that the artist has been wondering about man's place in this larger world since then. But really, photography changes things rather radically, possibly for very profound professional reasons. When photography comes along and can represent the world en masse and cheaply, what's the function of the artist? The artist is suddenly obsoleted. And very quickly, the artists were able to figure out that, well, if we do this impressionism thing, we can start to portray something that the camera cannot. We can give some of ourselves. And we can begin to show that it isn't just a talent in color and line, it is also a meaningful arrangement of cultural objects. It is portraying interior emotional qualities, representations of perception that refer to the artist's inner life. And while initially rejected by critics, this is eventually lauded, particularly as the discovery of the subconscious and Darwin's feelings about displacing man and putting him within a chain of evolution start to raise more directly our question of who we are in the world personally and what are we compelled by. And so these autobiographical portraits of the soul become, that are technically issued through, well, Impressionism and what follows, eventually abstract expressionism, what have you, are very appropriate to what the technological world is demanding of us all. This kind of turn to the interior is both a means of survival and an exploration of our new discoveries about what it is to be human. So, by directly engaging in expressionist and then abstract expressionist art, the artists moved further into places machines couldn't touch. But the job took on this strange new quality. Artists also became definers of life, people who explained us to ourselves, greater thinkers and greater souls, if you will. This is a very different job from, say, knocking out a killer rendering of The Last Supper, or even a Mona Lisa with a spooky background and a beguiling smile. Suddenly, artists must also become philosophers. If you saw the Jasper John show at MoMA a while back, you pass through whole rooms where he's just concentrating on initial number, initial alphabet. He's trying to take things back to this kind of core meaning in this search for true originality and the depth of meaning from which, we scrape away all the crud and take me back to the first thing. And it becomes an artistic experience, but also a kind of philosophical experience of his own personal passage to this better way of seeing. While they're not directly telling us how to think about the world at times, it's a job very different from using color and shape. And their biographies are often adapted to suit their output, carrying lessons for us, ways of being that make them special. For example, Vincent van Gogh is a kind of tortured saint in this context, or Jackson Pollock is a country genius of impossible appetites, and the art becomes both a personal statement and a kind of reification of a wholly mad saint, which is both elevating and also kind of dehumanizing for the artist who is struggling in the world. In either case, this genius is tied to a higher spirit, a richer soul from which we can learn by association. Now, the art market loves this, of course, because a good backstory increases the value of the object. The wealthiest people can show that they also possess deep souls by paying huge sums to associate themselves by someone who was touched by the gods. Works particularly well if their lives turned out tragically. Artists are those explorers of an incorporeal world. They speak of their souls, they exemplify someone touched by the gods, they explore philosophical genius and this insight of madness. This is where technology took them in their journey. Even when they begin commenting on the nature of this game with a Warhol or a Jeff Koons, they are selling their biographies and their philosophies in a way far removed from what artists traditionally did. The trend in modern art that I'm talking about is an elevation of the individual, the artist to that transcendent object. The art market, at least for officially famous art, is in a stratospheric range now that the world's wealthy struggle to outbid each other in how much they were moved by a painting, how much a human soul seems to have touched them. I believe, however, that this is a kind of hypertrophy, an evolutionary endpoint, and we are on the edge of a kind of cultural inflection that will change everything. And the artist will have to respond much the way artists had to respond to photography and other technological and scientific advances. As I indicated in my comments about the phone, we are changing the world in profound ways. We're putting everyone on the planet in front of us at all times. We are putting knowledge of the past in our pockets, with computers tracking us and analyzing our behavior. And we make self-fulfilling predictions about the future based on the data of the past, and ready new things to put in front of each other. The future itself is in the present, the past is in the present, and the present is incessant in its messages to us at all times. Everything soon gets caught up in a relentless and eternal now that is some ways highly dehumanizing and yet human, and somewhat incorporeal because it exists on a phone and not in human contact. That's the trope anyway. The reality is, while we spend more time staring at screens, wandering around in an invisible cyberspace, the most defining and meaningful connections will be in physical realities of birth, death, and human contact, as they always have been. I hope it is not lost on you that I am talking about what are considered more traditionally feminine or feminist concerns in the world, as opposed to male attributes of assertion or sharp, exclusive definition of the world. In new ways, the job of the artist becomes to awaken us to the here and now, increasingly in an incorporeal world. This is what I see on the art in these walls. In the book, The Front Desk, you can get some context about who Joanna is. We still all like our backstory. What she has been creating through this very hard work, which sometimes lasts all night, are paintings about a passage into a new era and into the prospect of a new kind of being. The heads, painted inside these luminous color fields, are in part a personal narrative. Talking to Sylvia earlier, she was saying, I see it as a breaking out into joy after years of sorrow. The dolls are cracking apart for her, and there's a youth and a vitality in these undifferentiated fields. And I also see that, but I see something abstract as well, or more general. I see something that's coming out for us all as much as I see something personal. And that is a kind of elemental self-remembering that we must all go through at this point. These harken back to the intense physicality of childhood and the difficult act of self-remembering. They memorialize our spiritual nature through a connection to others. Just looking around the room, I see these kind of themes of emergence, of being watched, with a certain moral dimension in some cases, as if we need to live up towards what these creatures, these dolls, these babies are seeing as they crack apart, not from a kind of ruin, but one gets a sense of emergence. They are growing into something larger, and there's a sense of becoming from them. The color fields are very dreamlike, much like remembering something indistinctly known that will become important to us later. And there is a certain elevation of the dolls as well that's so interesting. They are both precise characters in acts, but they are also frequently, I don't know if this was conscious or not, but they are frequently put on, I don't know what you'd say, pyramids, elevated in some sense of permanence, like that baby there. There's the black holding it up and elevating it so it's to be judged. But even in the use of the red baseline in this image here, or that baby up there. Baby, doll, which do you prefer? You don't want to say, okay. But you know, even in something like this, where it appears to be wearing a t-shirt, it is somehow both floating and judged and given a higher meaning by being carried on this base. That suggests there's something to be studied and learned from here. There's a charge to a certain moral dimension and introspection, but also a sense that something next will be coming. We are evolving into something next. Join me in this. As I said, there is an emerging feminist strand to me in this art, and not just popular feminism about power and equality, but a certain wisdom of having passed through several years that, from a female perspective, grounds someone in the world more profoundly. And with it, a struggle for compassion and a connection in an impersonal and incorporeal world. The reestablishment of ourselves, the assertion of ourselves as fragile beings in time and not incorporeal beings in an eternal now. Let us not be mistaken by some of my millennial talk. In some ways, what she is doing is a return to a traditional sense of art, informed craftsmanship, and search for spiritual moments. But these are now treated somewhat like friends and familiars and not as kings or popes or gods. Perhaps we are all as gods now, perhaps we are as equals, perhaps we are finding each other in this connection. We are also more aware of our fragility and of our interconnection. In this art, I maintain, we are charged to look deeply and to change ourselves. And only through time and a deep meditation in the physical world do we begin to become something else. Thank you very much.